If you followed me on Twitter, you always see me tweet about messed up stuff coming from Indonesia, usually in the Meanwhile in Indonesia tweets, but I don't usually do videos on them, or at least on the messed up stories. I did one somewhat inspirational story regarding Ponari, but that's it. This Indonesia story is one of the most disturbing rabbit holes that I have ever jumped on in my entire life, and it has shook the netizens of Indonesia to their core. If you're into some kink horror story, well, strap yourself in and consider yourself covered. Literally. Because this is about a fetish of doing all of those things. So there's a man by the name of Gilang Eizan. He has, a fetish of tying people up and wrapping them like a mummy or a corpse. Now, I'm not the one to judge what kind of fetishes that you have, so long as it involves adults who can consent. But if this story involves adults who can consent or has provided consent, it wouldn't be a disturbing story. And yes, the people who are involved among his particular fetish are adults who doesn't provide consent or non-adults who cannot consent and only just now realized that what he's been doing is manipulation into doing what he really likes to get off into. One of the most notable victims that spoke out against him is this person over here who made this lengthy Twitter thread that consists of photos, videos, and DM conversations with this person. For those of you who don't speak Indonesian, allow me to summarize the surface of the story, and I'll do my best to translate the words that are being said in the messages. So this person is a victim of Gilang's manipulation tactic. This person, who I'm going to refer to as Fikri, met Gilang on Instagram. Gilang asked Fikri to follow him back, and he followed him back because Gilang is his senior, not on the same university but on the same city. Gilang confessed to him that he is a 2015 student of the Erlangga University. Fikri confessed that he is a 2019 student of a redacted university. He began by asking Fikri that there is a specific research that he wants to do, so Gilang asked Fikri to give his phone number. Fikri gave his phone number to Instagram, but when Fikri gave his number, he said Iku, which means that in Javanese. Now, if you're not familiar with Indonesia, Indonesia has one unifying language, which is Bahasa Indonesia, but the locals also have their own language, Java, Bali, Sunda, etc. Why is this an issue? Well, Gilang felt offended that the person uses the Javanese word instead of the Indonesian word. The reason why is because he said that not everybody in Indonesia speaks Javanese, which is true, but it gets more and more disturbing. In this one segment of the message, he appreciated that Fikri apologized and considered his rebuke. Now, this is not your typical senior speaking to a freshman. This is a stranger speaking to another stranger, one who just so happened to be younger than him. The fact that he's manipulating a stranger into using a language that he's personally comfortable with is just the tip of the iceberg in the level of manipulation that this person went to. So they continued the conversation in WhatsApp, and there's a reason why the conversation happens there. WhatsApp as a social messaging app is technically quite trash. What WhatsApp did is when a media is being sent, like a video or an image, they will automatically save all of them, not as a temporary cache, but as actual files in your phone by default. So if Gilang has a request in the form of a video or a picture, all of those things will be saved automatically to his phone, which is a lot more convenient than Instagram's DMs. And not only that, but you get their real phone number as well, in case you need to call them. The conversation continues. Gilang gets more direct with this particular victim and asks him if he wants to become a model for a corpse that's being wrapped up. And he gets very specific in his request. He wants Fikri to cover himself up from top to bottom, including his face. He also always cuts Fikri off when he's asking questions, saying, "I asked the questions here first, kid." Jeez, talk about impolite. Fikri has no issues doing so because Gilang says that it's for academic purposes. No, really, that is his actual reasoning and possibly the darkest context I will use that joke for. Then he proceeds to explain his justification in why he's doing it for academic purposes. Apparently, there's a stigma amongst Indonesians that the act of wrapping a corpse just means that, wrapping a corpse. But according to Gilang, wrapping yourself up like that can be considered an act of therapy. Yes, a therapy for you maybe, you sick freak. He continues, imagine putting yourself in a situation where your body is covered up, including your face and your head, you can't do anything in that situation, right? Well, at that particular condition, your true colors will show. You will speak truthfully and modestly. You're nervous, but you won't have any other choice but to feel calm. You will feel like you're nothing. You will think of several things. You also won't try to do anything else. He then ends with this. Compared to the situation you're in right now, as in unwrapped, you can still do a lot of things, right? You can still choose to not be honest. It's different when you are wrapped and you feel desperate. Now, as I said before, this wouldn't have been that much of an issue if this is happening between two consenting adults who are perfectly aware that they are engaging in this fetish. But Fikri, the adult in this particular instance, is not aware that he is engaging into his fetish. In this particular instance, Fikri is being manipulated into thinking that he's doing this entire thing for a research, but in reality, he's doing this to fulfill his own fetish for academic purposes. Another excuse that he gives is that he's been wanting to do a psychological thriller or a prose or a story. The premise is about a teenager who got himself into a situation where he is wrapped and pressured so that his natural reaction, like his nervousness, his fear, and his tears come out. Then he realized that he did so for the purpose of therapy and to test how long he can breathe in that instance. That's not a psychological thriller, that's a Stockholm Syndrome documentary. Now, of course, Fikri was hesitant at first, but then Gilang continues to manipulate him by saying that his negative assumptions about being wrapped up is wrong and that he should try his fetish. Yup, this is the point of the message where the person is being groomed into trying out his fetish and being groomed into doing what he really gets off to. Through reading the DMs, the grooming process is the most diabolical and manipulative stuff that I have ever read in my entire life. Throughout the course of the message, he is very desperate in wanting Fikri to fulfill his requests. He is even willing to beg on his feet if he has to, which we'll get to that. So of course, in order for his fetish to be fulfilled, the victim needs a partner to wrap himself up. When Fikri suggested his mother, Gilang said he probably wouldn't do that. When Fikri suggested his high school friend, Gilang said that they might misunderstand. Not only that, but this particular research is a very private affair, and if you ask this to a group, they might misunderstand. In other words, they might find out that you are manipulating people into doing your disgusting fetish, you sick filth. Another thing, Gilang also said that he has an acute vertigo disease that causes him to get easily triggered when someone did something so minor but still very offensive according to him, which is why he chastised Fikri for using the Javanese word instead of the Indonesian word. Now, I am no doctor, but as far as I can research, vertigo is not a psychological disease, nor does it cause any significant psychological impact to the individual. So I don't know why he attributed his tendency to get triggered with minor details to a common disease about dizziness and motion sickness. It's more in line with other psychological diseases like maybe obsessive compulsive disorder or borderline personality disorder. I don't know if the doctors misdiagnosed him or there's another vertigo disease that I'm not aware of, or if he's doing this to gain sympathy points. Correct me if I'm wrong, I'm no expert, but at least he admitted that he has personal psychological issues. So the question right now is, did Fikri submit into his diabolical requests? Unfortunately, he did. And his reasoning is because Gilang is a senior and he's a junior, and he doesn't want to disrespect his seniors. Either Gilang took advantage of his authority or he was lying about being a senior. Either way, Fikri submitted into his fetish requests, and there are pictures and video evidence in the following thread, which I will not show because it is genuinely disturbing. Imagine a mummy, except the mummy is a natural person. The person is being covered by cheap cloths, and the person has to be wrapped around with duct tape to the point where the person cannot move. Don't worry, it gets worse. Fikri was told to cover himself up like that for 3 hours. Yeah, 3 hours. Fikri was angry to Gilang, and then Gilang proceeded to treat Fikri as if he's his own personal sex toy. Essentially, what Gilang said can be boiled down to, "Aw, are you mad at daddy? Do you need a hug? Ooh, just kidding." Don't worry, It gets worse! Now Gilang asked Fikri to cover up his friend instead, the one who Fikri asked to tie himself up, even suggesting one more friend to join in the party, because more victims are better, right? Not only that, but the aforementioned video that Fikri sent to Gilang was apparently wrong. How is it wrong? Well, it's very specific and I'd rather not explain it in meticulous detail, but the point is, it didn't go in a way that Gilang wanted it to go, and he asked Fikri to redo it again. I mean, more materials for him to get himself off into, right? The conversation turns into Gilang telling Fikri in how to properly tie himself up with the duct tape, and then this part happened. Gilang sent a picture of Fikri being tied up in duct tape and then said, "Who is this hottie?" No, I am not kidding. So Fikri unfortunately fell victim to his manipulation tactic and tried the same thing to his friend. Except this time, his friend was incredibly resistant and he is unable to get through the entire thing. Gilang, being the sick psycho that he is, continues to coerce Fikri into getting through the procedure, and even at one point said that his vertigo might relapse and he might end his life. Yes, you read that right. He manipulated Fikri into thinking that he might end his life. At this point, Fikri only cares about the well-being of his friend and he can only send one picture to Gilang. Gilang said that he can't because it's not within the agreement and that there will be huge consequences if it's not fulfilled. The consequences is his aforementioned vertigo relapsing or something along those lines. And if it gets worse, he might have suicidal tendencies. Fikri becomes angry and realizes that Gilang is using them as lab rats for his sick research, or more accurately, toys for his fetish. This is at the point where Gilang becomes absolutely desperate and continues to manipulate Fikri into doing whatever he wants him to do, even resorting to crying and begging in the process. Gilang said that he's shivering and he asked for an apology by Fikri for being angry at him. From this conversation, you can see that he goes on and on, asking for Fikri to apologize to him in the most desperate fashion that you can think of. I'm just gonna leave these conversations for you to absorb because this is a genuine mental breakdown from someone who is clearly not well in the head. At one point during the conversation, Gilang actually asked Fikri if he wants to have his mother's phone number. That's right, Gilang asked Fikri if he wants to have Gilang's mother's phone number. Why? I honestly have no idea. But after all of that tears and shivering, Gilang proceeds to ask Fikri if he wants to be wrapped up again, because as I mentioned before, it wasn't done right in his eyes. Fikri of course denies this request, and this is at the point where Gilang just gave up. Gilang said his goodbye to Fikri and ends with, "The world is much better without me here." Essentially, he expressed his desire in committing seppuku. This person is not mentally well, has suicidal thoughts, and is clearly in need of serious help. But the story gets even worse. So after this particular mental breakdown, someone took over his Instagram and made the announcement that they should be praying for Gilang to be okay, and that anyone who had a fight with him should contact the account. Fikri, who had a fight with him for being angry at his ridiculous requests, replied to the account and say, "Hey, I had a fight with him." Gilang, or whoever has control of Gilang's social media right now, replies to Fikri. What follows is a barrage of very unpleasant text messages coming from presumably Gilang's relatives. I honestly don't know where these messages are coming from, but assuming that it's from his relatives and not Gilang himself role-playing as his relative, it seems to me that his relatives are aware of what he's been doing and did nothing to change it. The person who has Gilang's account essentially went on a tirade to explain how Gilang's vertigo is a serious matter that should not be taken lightly, and how it's offensive for Fikri to suggest that Gilang's disease is used as a threat. Yes, it is. He used it specifically to threaten him and his friends so that he can perform whatever sorts of sick desires that he have. He even uses it as an excuse that he might commit suicide. Forgive me for saying that I have no sympathy for people knowingly using their disease to emotionally manipulate people into doing their deeds. The person who owned the account admitted that the research is not their particular expertise. In other words, I don't care if he emotionally manipulates people for his fetish. fetish. The person who has the account continues by saying, well, you and your friend has made a commitment to help, but you didn't help him. You said that you sacrificed a lot, but how much? I think you missed the part where this guy asked them to wrap themselves up in cheap cloth, suffocate themselves, and subject themselves into hours of pain, but okay, do go on. The owner of the account said that they're willing to offer compensation for all the pain they caused because they're not that poor. The owner also said, I'm not asking you to take material responsibility, I'm asking you to take a moral responsibility. No, you? I think you missed the part where your son or relative or whoever the hell Gilang is to you manipulated this person into wrapping themselves up in duct tape for his own personal gratification. I think you're the one who should take a moral responsibility for such a depraved action. The message ends with Fikri's own reply thread in the most polite manner possible. I mean, this guy is a freaking saint. And speaking of Fikri, he followed the previous conversation thread with a disclaimer that he's not homophobic or have any issues with LGBT people in general. Frankly, he doesn't really care. But he does express that he feels unpleasant when Gilang attempts to flirt with him. And yes, Gilang is apparently bisexual according to his Instagram bio. At the very end of Fikri's reply, Fikri shared a very recent article about this entire debacle, and from that point on, the account has never replied to any messages despite being shown to be active on both Instagram and WhatsApp. Then the thread continues, and it's revealed that the situation that you've been hearing all up to this point is one out of many, and it has been done to several people, many times, dating all the way back to 2013. One user in particular has a similar experience, except all of it was done directly, as in Gilang actually meets the victim in question and proceed to do the exact same thing to him, except with the addition that the victim is also raped. He was actually cited in the YouTube comments of a video talking about the procedure to wrapping up corpses, in which he says, "Very good video, especially the male corpse model. Greetings, I'm from UNER, Erlangga University. I'm doing a research about wrapping corpses. Can I know the name of the person who plays the corpse?" There's also another video of the same topic in which he says, "What's the full name of the person who plays the corpse?" On a much darker note, the videos are starring high schoolers. At the time of making this video, we don't know the whereabouts of Gilang. People have contacts with him, so he shouldn't be very hard to find. Not only that, but the university that he went to, Erlangga University, also made an official statement in regards to the entire thing. This has turned into not just a viral social media scandal, but also a university-wide scandal. Regardless, they will do what they can to make sure that this person receives the justice that he deserves, including a dropout from the university altogether. So I'm gonna end this video with a very funny interaction between Gilang and another person who is not only much younger than him, but is also way too clever for him. I put the story here so that you people can take notes in how to deal with this sort of nonsense. Do you remember when I say that Gilang is willing to beg on his feet if he has to, as long as he gets into what he wants? Well, believe it or not, Gilang also has a foot fetish. At one point during a conversation with another person, Gilang praised his toe for being very big, and therefore he wants more pictures of his two toes. He also did the exact same thing that he did with the other victims by saying that he wants to do it for academic purposes or research purposes, except this time the person doesn't believe him. Hilarity ensues. It annoyed him so much to the point where he went full caps lock mode. So good job to whoever you are for telling this disgusting human being to know his place.